Hey, YouTube. How are you? Today's video is a little different from my normal rants or reviews. I felt like spent the last couple days having some really good depression pity parties for myself, and then all of a sudden I got this idea as some of the literature that I've come across through the years and in my education. Was running through my mind, and so I came up with this top 5 list, comparison contrasting classics to classics. This could be expanded upon for teachers as a lesson plan. Sometimes I think about how I could help teachers with stuff like that. I used to really enjoy doing stuff like that. Anyway, here we go. So across the years, as I read various genres, adolescent lit is one of my favorite genres. I really think that the writers in the coming of age stories have done some really great work there, at least from what I've read. Yes, I'll admit, my favorite of the adolescent lit writers is that Mortal Instruments writer. I love that series, and I'm afraid to pick up another book because I hate being disappointed when I pick up a book to read. But anyway, I'm going to talk about classics that, for the past 100 to 200 years, people have mostly agreed that these are classics. And I have a top 5 list of the classics that I want to talk about, the themes that I'm comparing each novel to, and which novel I think did a better job, in my opinion, as far as tying it up at the end in a way that was more satisfying. Okay, so here we go. This is not in any order of the best novel or the worst novel. This is sort of random in order, just what comes out of my brain. So there's no order to this. I'm going to start with talking about Fitzgerald and Hemingway. I'm going to compare The Great Gatsby to Old Man and the Sea. And you may not see the comparison here because the stories may seem very different if you're aware of both of these stories, The Great Gatsby and Old Man and the Sea. And I can understand why you would say they're very different, but let me show you why I am choosing to compare the two stories. Now, just a little backstory from what I learned about Fitzgerald and Hemingway. Even though they were considered great writers in their lives and were successful in and after their lives, they had a rivalry while they were alive because they were both, attempting to write the great American classic while they were alive. And so there was a rivalry between Fitzgerald and Hemingway that a lot of people who read their work now are not aware of. Anyway, I don't know if that matters or not, but it was a factoid that was brought to my attention as I learned about them. Now, I was introduced to Hemingway when I was a child, and I was not ready to read his books because the first book that was placed in front of me from Hemingway was For Whom the Bell Tolls, I think it was. And it was a very thick book. It was like thick like the Bible. And I was like, you gotta be kidding. I'm 8 years old. I'm not reading that. So I didn't read that. But anyway, I did read some stuff, some Hemingway stuff in college. And then later on, I saw, after college, I saw a book called Old Man and the Sea, and I read it. And I never thought to compare it to The Great Gatsby because they are different kinds of stories. Old Man and the Sea is about an old fisherman who goes into the ocean and struggles to bring this marlin back to shore. Whereas The Great Gatsby is about this man, Fitzgerald, who romanticizes the past and wants to mm, use his newly acquired fortune to bring back the past. So, how are they alike? Where are the similarities? And what are the differences besides the basic plot line? Well, I think there's more similarities between these two stories than what scratches the surface. You see, in Old Man and the Sea, it's more symbolic, and in Hemingway, where Fitzgerald uses a lot of color and symbolism in like poetry in the writing. Um, Hemingway uses a lot of symbolism also, but it's just done in a different technique. So I think The Great Gatsby and Old Man and the Sea do have a lot in common because the main characters, Santiago and Gatsby, are both trying to bring something back. Um, Gatsby wants to bring back the past love with Daisy, and he wants it to be fresh and rosy just because he has a lot of money now. And Santiago wants to bring back that marlin. He wants to bring that marlin back to shore so that he can brag about it and prove to everybody that he's an incredible fisherman. And based on his skill as a fisherman, he can accomplish this. So I think Gatsby and Santiago have a lot in common. Just the stories seem different. Um, but I have to give the brownie points and the thumbs up to Hemingway over Fitzgerald because where Fitzgerald ends it as a tragedy with Gatsby dead, and Santiago does. I mean, Hemingway doesn't. Santiago does survive. And he does sort of accomplish bringing the marlin back, although the marlin, there's nothing much left of the marlin. So, um, I mean, the theme is the same. They both do not accomplish really what they wanted to accomplish. But I like Hemingway's non tragic ending, although there is some tragedy because of the marlin's demise. Um, there's some tragedy, but at least Santiago survives, and so it's not a complete loss. Okay, so that's the comparison there between two rivals. Fitzgerald ends his great Gatsby classic with The Death of Gatsby. I hate that ending. And Hemingway ends his classic, The Old Man and the Sea, which is sort of tragic about the marlin, but it's much easier to get over than if Santiago had died trying to save the marlin. Okay, so the next one I want to compare is Ethan Frome by Edith Wharton compared to Jane Austen's Sense and Sensibility. Now, it may seem like, again, that these stories don't have much in common, but they do. They're both like lemonade stands. Basically, this breaks somebody's heart, and then you get lemons and you make lemonade out of it. And that's supposed to, like, show that life goes on even if you don't get what you want. In Sense and Sensibility, Marianne wanted, what's his name? Whatever his name was, whatever, the W guy. But she didn't. She got Brandon instead. And in Ethan Frome, it's a weird triangle going on there. They all wanted to be loved. In the end, you got two cripples and a caretaker. Again, I'm going to give the thumbs up to Jane Austen in Sense and Sensibility, where at least not getting what you want is a lot more satisfying and a happier ending than Wharton's tragic tale of a bad romance just going totally apeshit terrible. I mean, Ethan Frome is so tragic that, I mean, if you're already depressed, I definitely don't recommend that book. All right. So yeah, so what they have in common is that it's disappointment in love, even through the best expectations or the best laid plans. And it's just a lot of disappointment in both stories about what love or what marriage offers. But with Jane Austen's novel, at least she gives us some hope at the end that, it can be resolved and it can be okay somehow. And Jane Austen does that with most of her novels, which is why so many people love Jane Austen novels. Edith Wharton doesn't do that. She basically just says with Ethan Frome, you're damned if you do, damned if you don't, and it all sucks. That's what Ethan Frome taught me. And I don't like that story. It's extremely depressing. Uh, okay, so the next one I want to talk about is Lord of the Flies by William Golding, and Lord of the Rings by J.R.R. Tolkien. William Golding, I believe, is an American writer who wrote Lord of the Flies, and I could be wrong, but I think I'm right. And Lord of the Flies is written by J.R.R. Tolkien, which is an Oxfordian from England. So they've both been turned into movies, but I do think that there's a lot more fanship to Lord of the Rings over Lord of the Flies. And you could say, what? How can you make a comparison between these two stories besides the fact that the word Lord of the is in the title? I can see a comparison between these two stories. And it should be obvious. Violence. There's a lot of violence in both stories. The only difference I see between the stories is that women are incorporated and mentioned in Lord of the Rings, where in Lord of the Flies it's all about men and boys or males. There's no female entered into the picture of Lord of the Flies. But in Lord of the Rings, there's sort of this female question and the marriage question, but both stories basically show a will to power, and the violence that occurs because of that. And again, I'm going to give the thumbs up on this one to Tolkien over Golding, because if you're going to have to go through all that stress in reading a novel and just all that horrible violence, at least at the end of the story, Tolkien, again, leaves you with some hope, whereas Golding doesn't leave you hopeless, but leaves you feeling like the Marlin in Hemingway's story. Okay. The next one I want to talk about is John Steinbeck versus Margaret Mitchell. Now, I'm basically making a comparison about Steinbeck's writings. I'm going to say writings because I'm not really sure which one to talk about, Of Mice and Men or of Grapes of Wrath, versus Margaret Mitchell's Gone with the Wind. Okay, so the reason I say I'm not sure which one to talk about is because I actually read Of Mice and Men, but I did not read Grapes of Wrath. I only watched the movie, and my memory's a little flaky. So I'm sort of just combining both of those in sort of a Steinbeck style compared to Margaret Mitchell's Gone with the Wind. And I want to say something about Margaret Mitchell's Gone with the Wind. A lot of people ragged. I mean, this story was a classic, and Margaret Mitchell's Gone with the Wind. And while many people adored it and still adore it, like myself, there were many people who did not appreciate it. Maybe perhaps someone like, the writer of The Color Purple thought that Margaret Mitchell received too much credit for Gone with the Wind, or someone like Zora Neale Hurston, who wrote Their Eyes Were Watching God. There were other stories, but I'm not talking about Black history or Black literature at this time. I'm just talking about the ones that sort of stay in my mind a lot. And Gone with the Wind definitely stays in my mind a lot because I was raised with it. It was my mother's favorite book, movie, whatever you want to call it. So I'm comparing Margaret Mitchell to Steinbeck because I think they both covered the theme of a land or a nation or a world after a war, and the devastation and the survivors, kind of like Kirkman's Walking Dead. You know, what's left? What happens to these people after all of that devastation? I think Steinbeck and Mitchell both tried to cover that, and I don't think that either one of them actually leaves you with a feeling of, okay, it's all going to be great at the end. So I would say in this comparison, they are very close to equal, but I still prefer Mitchell's ending better because even though uh, you don't really know you don't really know anything at the end of Steinbeck's books or Mitchell's book. You don't know anything, but still, Mitchell leaves you with at least the main character standing tall and saying, "Tomorrow is another day," and that strength is something. You know, I mean, you have a lot of strong characters in the Steinbeck novels too, but no one seems to resonate as strong as Scarlett. So for that, give the thumbs up to Mitchell in that comparison. Um, and then finally, I'm going to talk about two books that I did not read, but I did see the movies. And so I'm basically, if I get this wrong, forgive me for not having done the reading. But I'm talking about Herman Melville's Moby Dick and Alexander Dumas's Count of Monte Cristo. Now, they may sound again like, what do they have in common? How am I comparing these two novels? But they do have something in common, and the theme that they have in common is revenge. You see, in Moby Dick, Ahab was obsessed with his revenge against Moby Dick, and in Count of Monte Cristo, there are several characters who are dealing with the theme of revenge, and, including the main character. And I think Melville wrote an incredibly great story with Moby Dick. However, by today's reading and language preferences, I would say that all those nautical terms kind of get in the way of that great story. But it's still, the theme is still relevant. It's not just because revenge is something that humans feel or go through as a victim or a villain, but because it helps you to understand when revenge is in the air, maybe like how you could deal with it or escape it or try to be wise about it in some way. Like in Melville, the co-captain or whatever, he was the voice of reason, trying to reason with Ahab and get him to see his craziness, but he was not very effective at convincing him because Ahab was a little too obsessed. And I think that in the Count of Monte Cristo, it's a little bit better as a story about revenge because, again, at the end, Dumas gives us more of a satisfying ending, a happier ending, to know that a character who was gypped or victimized in some way got his revenge just by having a happy and successful life to live. which is, I guess, what Ahab thought he would get if he was able to have inflicted his revenge on Moby Dick, but he didn't, because whereas in the Count of Monte Cristo, the victim was only responsible for himself, where in Melville's story, the Captain Ahab was sacrificing the lives of his crew for his revenge, and that was not good. So even though I think there's a lot more as far as wisdom that you can gain from Moby Dick, I still give the thumbs up to Alexander Dumas for Count of Monte Cristo, because just like Jane Austen, it wraps it up better and gives us a more satisfying ending as to why the hell we're reading this and what the hell is it all for. Those are my comparisons for some classics right now. I'm probably going to talk more about these stories in the future in my articles, or as another video if I get more into depth about these stories. These are stories that are in my mind a lot, as they were part of my education, and they resonate a lot when I think about writers, when I think about themes, when I think about classics, and when I think about wisdom. So I don't know if that was interesting to you or not, but if you're a teacher or a student and you are dealing with any of these stories and you need some feedback or ideas about these stories for an essay you need to write or a lesson plan you need to create, I'd be happy to, correspond with you, and we could discuss it. Have a great day.